Okay, so this is a recap of round 12 of the candidates. This is going to be a really quick recap because I'm still like 2 days behind in this coverage. So we're going to look at the two decisive games quickly, and we're going to ignore the draws for today. Not because they weren't interesting, but just because I want to sort of save time. Um, so Caruana and Aronian drew, Svidler and Giri drew as well. So Kiri with the 12th straight draw. And the decisive games were Karyakin winning against Topalov. That was a pretty exciting game, and Nakamura winning over Anand. Those games were both quite short, actually. Quite quick victories for the player with the white pieces. So, anyways, without further ado, we're going to go into those games. We're going to start with the Karyakin game. Right, so Karyakin Topalov was a pretty exciting Najdorf. Karyakin castled queenside and shoved all his kingside pawns up the board. This looks like an English attack. It wasn't quite an English attack. It was an Adams attack with h3 on move 6. Yeah, and opposite side castling. White's attack is obviously quite a bit ahead of Black's at the moment. Although Black's not necessarily in too much danger. If he plays a move like Bishop f6 here, then there's not really any easy way for White to break through. For example, if you take on h7, then Black can play king h8 and use White's own pawn as a defensive shield for his king, like we saw in the Caruana Nakamura game. That's often an idea that can be used. And if you try to break through with h6, then after something like h takes g6 or f takes g6, let's say h takes g6, f takes g7, bishop takes g7. This bishop, in dragon style, covers everything up nicely. And yeah, it looks a bit scary, but there's not really necessarily anything for white. For example, he can't do this yet, but if he tries to play queen to the h file, black can answer with rook e8. And then after queen h7, he can go king f8, and he's probably going to be surviving, especially if he manages to chop off white's dark square bishop. Because to get this attack through when this bishop's being kettoed here, you've got to trade this guy for this guy, because this guy's a really good defensive piece. You can't do that right away, though, on account of you lose your everything after queen g5. This is sort of a typical thing for the Sicilian. It's why they say you put your king on b1, just to get out of any potentially checking things along there. But anyways, bishop f6 is probably what Olive should have played. Instead, he played the kind of nonchalant rook c8. And I think this was a mistake because it allowed Karyakin to proceed with the typical attacking idea h6. And the point of h6 is just basically to blow everything up. Yeah, so takes here next and open the h file. And this bishop's not ready to swing across and defend, which is important. F takes g6 was played, allowing knight takes e6. It's difficult to suggest an alternative. In fact, f takes is probably the least of the evils. Like, for example, if you play h takes g6, this is near suicide after h takes g7. Let's say king takes g7. I don't think rook e8 is going to be much better. Something like takes bishop h6, king g8, and even just rook dg1, and you can't survive this attack. It's just too powerful. White's got too many attackers. Black's got not enough defenders, and yeah, this is not something that Black will be surviving. Like queen to h5 is a threat, with just utter devastation everywhere. Rook c5 is a defensive try, covering the square. Then there's even knight takes e6, f takes e6, rook takes g6, and this attack is too powerful to resist. Yeah, so he went with f takes g6 instead. Notice how important it was that Black spent a turn on rook c8 rather than bishop f6, because in the bishop f6 lines, when White was going h6, this bishop was always ready to swing across and provide defense for the king. In this case, that's just too slow. So it turns out the move rook c8, it doesn't actually contribute that much for a queenside attack yet, and it just seems to be, for the needs of the position, a waste of time. Knight takes e6 happened, and Karyakin won an exchange. And Karyakin went on to win without too much trouble. So a good game from Karyakin, an instructive one in the sense that Black really does have to act carefully when he's playing the Sicilian and facing the sort of wing attack that Karyakin was producing. That really, if you make one wrong move, you're basically screwed. And you have to be very precise in making sure your king always has sufficient defensive coverage. and to never be too complacent about that. So Nakamura Anand was another quick victory for white, and this game occurred out of an English. And in this position, Anand played a very risky move, which is either really good or really bad, and it turned out to be really bad, unfortunately for him. He played the move g5, which might look at first like it's trapping the knight on h4. Unfortunately, it doesn't, and it just ends up being a weakness in the long run, which we'll see in the future. This bishop on c1 is going to come to b2, and it's going to exert a really powerful influence on the dark squares on the king side, and that's ultimately going to be a great part in black's demise. So how does white save his piece? He's got to start with b4, which does counterattack one of black's pieces, and after it moves, then bishop b2, bringing this bishop to a really strong diagonal and counterattacking one of black's pieces. So again, at this point, black really doesn't want to capture on, well, he really doesn't want to capture on h4 here and allow knight takes f6 check. But in general, let's say in this position, he doesn't necessarily want to take here and allow b takes c5, because then it's just sort of an exchange of pieces, and there's no clear reason for having played g5 and g takes h4, because again, that does leave serious holes around your king. So bishop b6, bishop b2, and it's important that black isn't able to just trade this guy off and then take on h4, because after knight takes d5, c takes d5, this pawn recaptures the piece and initiates another attack on one of black's pieces. So black can temporarily win a pawn by taking and taking here. But again, weakness is incurred to black's king side on the dark squares, and especially considering black's dark square bishop is not in a position where it can participate on the king side in the foreseeable future. White's got a huge advantage, and even if he's concerned about winning his pawn back, he can play queen c2, which appears to win it back immediately. But he can even just play queen h5 and start attacking right away, and his attack's definitely worth way more than the pawn he's sacrificed. So instead, knight d4 was played by Anand. Knight e5 looks natural, and now this begs the question, how does the knight get out of the attack? It's actually the move f4, which is important, because if e takes f3, then the knight escapes. And again, if this knight escapes, then it's basically confirmed that black has made kingside weaknesses for nothing. Instead, if knight c4 is played, leaving two of white's pieces attacked, white can just sacrifice the guy on b2. And black's well advised to actually not take this guy, because I think he faces a huge attack after queen h5. And white's probably winning already, because there's simply no defense. The threat is to play queen takes f7, king h8, and then g6 or something. And white's breaking through, and there's going to be no defense to this. But every manner in which black can defend the f7 pawn has some flaw. For example, queen e7 runs into bishop takes e4, initiating mate threats on h7, and this guy can't be taken because then that would leave f7 undefended. Same thing with queen d7 is that white can play the decoy bishop h3, and this bishop's again immune, and after the queen moves, white's going to play knight f5, and on bishop takes f5, play bishop takes f5. So like this, and then that's going to leave really powerful threats on h7. And the rook defenses don't help either, like rook f8 can be met by bishop takes e4 with the same problems, and rook e7 can be met by bishop takes e4 as well. So it's a bit surprising at first, but in fact it's not really surprising, considering white's got currently 3 guys attacking, black's got almost nobody defending. These guys aren't developed, these guys aren't participating, this bishop can come into the attack, so it really should be no surprise that white's winning here. And again, the g7 pawn is conveniently for white disappeared. So, that's not how to do it. Another try is knight e7, and then you might wonder how the knight is going to escape. Trick question, because it doesn't. White can play some move. Let's say bishop f6. And you can't really take this knight, because after queen h5, there are threats of queen g5, queen g7, and this knight is pinned. So knight g6 can always be met by bishop takes queen. And probably black's actually just obligated to go knight g6 right now and give his queen up for the 2 pieces. And white's obviously winning in that variation. Right, so in conclusion, there's no way for black to move his own piece out of attack and keep the knight on h4 trapped in a convenient way. Um, and this sort of just proves that g5 was a bad move. And generally, on general principles, g5 is a move that's not likely to work once you've castled, and with this bishop coming to b2. So I'm not entirely sure why Anand played it. Faulty preparation, misremembering his preparation, I'm not sure. Um, but that doesn't seem like a move Anand would be likely to play over the board if he weren't basing it off of some preparation he was remembering or thought he was remembering correctly. Anyways, he went knight d4 instead. The point being that if white takes this guy immediately with e takes d4 or something, he blocks out this bishop and he incurs these sort of wretched pawns. Same thing with bishop takes d4. Then that bishop comes off the board and he incurs the triple pawns. So he elected not to take this right away. Nakamura did. And after g takes h4, he decided not to take on d4 right away, but temporarily sacrifice a piece with d takes e4. So now he's ready to capture on d4 and not have his structure in triple pawn shambles. And it is a temporary piece sacrifice because black can't actually save his knight and be up a piece on account of the only quote-unquote safe square for the guy is on b5. And then white can at very least trap it with a4, in addition to maybe just playing queen h5 and just playing for mate right away. So Anand went knight e6. He gave the piece back in this way. He's at least got this rook to defend laterally at this point. But white played e5, potentially being ready to swing this bishop into the game, as well as putting pressure on the d6 point. And white's just doing really, really well here. So h takes g, queen g5. So at least stopping white's queen from coming into some venomous square. E takes d6, rook takes d6, and queen b3. And white's ready to now bring a rook to d1 and just rely on his currently superior development. The problem for black is it's difficult to bring this bishop out without blundering your b7 pawn. So like bishop e6, there's queen b3 threatening mate, and then after you stop that with f6, I guess, then white can take a pawn and, well, be up a pawn and still have all the benefits he had previously. Problem is, black's got this kind of position with a weak king and worse development, worse pawn structure, without having even any extra material to boot. h5 was an attempt. White just brought his rook to the d file, rook h6, and rook d5. And white's pieces are just dominating the board. Black's pieces are undeveloped and uncoordinated. This bishop's not participating, fighting on e3 pawn's granite. This rook isn't exactly in a good spot, and these guys are still not developed. So he did try to develop one of his guys with bishop f4, and white started bringing his pieces over to the king side for the kill. Rook g6, rook e5, queen d6, and now finally bishop e4. And these pieces are coordinated beautifully, meanwhile blacks are very much not, and Anand resigned. There are variations like if rook g7, then rook g5, let's say, and in some variation like this, white can even take a timeout to capture on b7 and then be a pawn up as well as all of his previous pluses. And on a move like rook e6, then there's bishop d5, skewering the rook to the f7 pawn, and he's probably going to have to give up the exchange on e6. And again, then white will have extra material in addition to all of his pluses. So yeah, there's no hope for black here, so Anand understandably resigned. Right, so that's going to be it for today's video. Thank you for watching. I still have to make a round 13 recap, ideally before tomorrow, before the final round tomorrow. So yeah, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe and whatever, and I'll see you guys then.